Welcome to Nice and Blunt. My name is Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for week 4. Some players I did not rank in this video due to injury would include Puka Nacua on IR, Cooper Kupp, who is out, A.J. Brown, who I think will be out one more week, but not totally sure. Deebo Samuel, I also think is doubtful. We'll find out on him. Keenan Allen and Jordan Addison, though, there is some optimism that they will practice this week and will get on the field on Sunday. So they're not in the rankings, but they are moving in the right direction. Marquise Brown on IR, and then Adam Thielen was added to the mix as well. He's on IR for a while. So that is it. All of the notes. Let's hop in to these half PPR week 4 wide receiver rankings. At number 1, I have CeeDee Lamb at the Giants, and in his last 4 games, he's played very well, averaging 17.8 points per game, 10 plus targets, 7 plus catches, 111 yards per game with 2 touchdowns in that sample size. The Giants have also given up 4 touchdowns to the position in 3 games. Give me Lamb as the number 1. I think still rest of season, I want him more than any other receiver. Last year, it took him a while to get going. After the week 7 bye, he was fantastic, and they have another week 7 bye coming up. So I think he gets going even sooner. He will flash that number 1 upside soon enough. Number 2, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the Seahawks. And the Seahawks defense currently ranks as the worst matchup you could ask for. They've only allowed 79 receiving yards to receivers so far. But that was against the Broncos, the Patriots, and then the Dolphins with Tim Boyle. So I do not trust it. I know they have some legit corners. It is a bit of a downgrade, but not enough to scare me away. There's no way I'm benching St. Brown, especially with Laporta banged up and Jameson Williams disappearing last week. I think you upgrade St. Brown even more and trust the stud to shine in primetime. Number 3, I have JaMarr Chase at Carolina, who turned 7 targets into 6 catches, 118 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week. However, they lost the game. So coming off an 0-3 start, I expect a no-nonsense win here against a bad team. The Panthers are still not a team I trust. So Burrow might play favorites and just get it to their best playmaker. I do not fear the secondary. No one can stop JaMarr Chase. They let Quentin Johnston drop 2 touchdowns on them a couple weeks ago. So I definitely am still starting Chase. He has that top 5 potential. It's hard to replicate. Number 4, I got Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Washington, and I am dropping down a tier, but this is the matchup you want. They rank by far and away as number 1. They allow 45 points per game to the wide receiver position so far this season, and the next best matchup, the number 2, would be the Rams, who allow 36 points per game, and that's a 25% drop from number 1 to number 2. So I absolutely love Harrison in this spot, especially with Trey McBride currently in the concussion protocol. There is a ton of targets headed his way. And over the last 2 weeks, Harrison has had 19 targets. He's had almost 200 yards on 9 catches and 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 21 points per game in the last 2 weeks. So he has paid off. He's lived up to the hype, and he will be elite in week 4. Number 5, I have Chris Godwin versus Philly, and he's maintaining the status as the number 1 target for Baker. And now I think he's overtaken Evans even in the red zone. Godwin has now scored 3 touchdowns over the course of 3 games, and he has at least 8 targets and 6 catches in every game as well. He feels locked into the top 10, and he also gets an upgrade. The Eagles have a bad secondary. They did perform somewhat well on defense against Derek Carr, but I think Godwin can torch their young secondary. So I love him this week. I think he's a lock in your lineup. Number 6, though, I have Rashee Rice at the Chargers, and you also have to trust Rashee moving forward. Without Pacheco, while Kelsey hasn't done anything, and Worthy is still finding his footing, Rice is the key weapon for Andy Reid. He either goes over 100 yards or scores a touchdown this season, and last week he did both in a game while he got 14 targets. So he has earned massive trust, and he's been averaging 17.6 points per game this season. He is a lock in your lineup no matter what. But in a divisional game, there is a chance that he is a little impacted, and historically this is the spot where Kelsey plays hero ball. So that's my only reason not to rank him top 5. It's mainly the matchup, but I think you're extremely encouraged with Rashee Rice. Number 7, Nico Collins versus Jacksonville. And even in a down game in week 3, Nico still caught 4 catches for 86 yards, and I'm not worried about it because he still had 10 targets on the game. It was just a bad week for Stroud against a good defense, and Jacksonville hasn't been able to stop anybody so far this year. And the last time these two teams played, Nico caught 7 catches for 104 and a touchdown. He is still locking your lineup, a weekly top 10 play as the best receiver for Stroud. Number 8, though, I am downgrading Justin Jefferson this week at the Packers. I have no long-term concerns with Jefferson, but this is a tricky matchup for him against Jair Alexander in division ever since his rookie year. If we look at the history of this matchup, Jefferson in the first 2 games as a rookie was held to only 26 yards in each game. In year 2, he had one blow-up game, one game with 6 for 58. And in year 3, he had his best game of the series, 9 catches, 184 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The second game, he was locked up with only 1 catch for 15 yards. And last year, he was held to 59 yards on 5 catches. He did not play in week 8 at the Packers. So he usually has one bad game, one good game, and the great game has happened at home both times. So the fact that this game is in Green Bay, where Alexander historically has the edge, it's a legit downgrade this week. I still think you have to start him, but I think especially in the red zone, they probably lean elsewhere, and it might be the week where Addison comes back. So I don't feel that confident he finds the end zone in this game, but I think you just have to start him. I think the ranking, though, reflects the downgrade. And if it was daily fantasy, if you were on like DraftKings or FanDuel, for instance, I would not put Jefferson in my lineup. I think this is the week to fade him because of Jair. Number 9, I have Malik Nabers versus Dallas. And Nabers has 30 targets in the last 2 games, 18 catches, 209 yards, and 3 touchdowns, averaging 23.8 points per game. And even if you add week 1, his average is still 18.9 points per game. He's been an elite option so far this season. And they're going to be showing off their brand new weapon in one of their few primetime games all year, especially with Saquon playing so well in Philly. They need to give their fan base and the national audience something to be excited about. So I definitely trust the volume to persist. My only hesitation why I'm not ranking him top 5 this week is because the Cowboys usually own this matchup and can definitely shut down Daniel Jones entirely. Last year, they won like 40-3 in week 1, and that was also on the Giants' home field. So I do worry that there is a world this is a complete blowout and there's just nothing to be had from the Giants' offensive players. But this matchup doesn't scare you so far. They have been vulnerable overall, and I do think Nabers has earned your trust. 30 targets in 2 games is ridiculous. So he's fantastic. He's living up to the hype, and I do think he's a lock in your lineup. Moving forward, number 10, I got DK Metcalf at Detroit, and DK has 20 targets over the last 2 games, 14 catches, 233 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's been phenomenal. They are really establishing him early while they don't have Kenneth Walker as well. He's clearly their best athlete. The Detroit matchup is scary on the ground, but through the air, it is a juicy spot to be in. They allow 203 yards per game to the position, which is the most in the league. 3 wide receivers have also scored a touchdown on Detroit in 3 games as well. So I really trust his upside this week. I think they get him going as early as the first drive, and they need him in order to win. I love DK this week. I think he has one of his best games of the year. Number 11, I got DeVonta Smith at Tampa Bay, who's questionable at the moment, currently in the concussion protocol, and would obviously need to be benched if he is ruled out. But obviously, if he's healthy, he's a must start as long as A.J. Brown misses time. He's usually a top 20 option regardless, so you are definitely trusting Smith if available. He has 7 catches in all 3 games, and the last 2 weeks without A.J. Brown has 20 total targets, 155 yards and a touchdown, an average of 14.3 points per game. Is bust proof. That will remain the case if he is on the field. Number 12, I have DJ Moore versus the Rams, and I am really excited about this matchup because the Rams defense ranks as the number 2 matchup for wide receivers this year. 36.4 points per game allowed, 189 yards per game, and 6 touchdowns to wide receivers through 3 games. That is a significant upgrade for every Bears receiver, and I do still think DJ Moore is their number 1 guy. The stats were kind of hollow for Caleb Williams last week, but it seemed like a light did turn on as the game went along. I think this passing game has found a groove, and in a great matchup, this is the spot you want to trust more. I think he could feast on a bad Ram secondary. There is a chance he puts up a Juaun Jennings level performance in this spot. So I think he's a must start this week. If Keenan is healthy, then maybe he moves down a few spots. But at the moment, I'm not ranking Keenan Allen. Number 13, I have Juaun Jennings versus the Patriots. And speaking of Jennings, I think it's legit. I think what we saw last week is more of what will come. Probably not 3 touchdowns every week, but I wouldn't be shocked if he had more targets than Aiyuk, while Debo and Kittle remain sidelined, especially because of the McCaffrey targets being up for grabs, as Jordan Mason looks kind of incapable of getting more than 2 targets any game. I think Jennings is a lock in the top 15. I know they paid Aiyuk this season, but he looks bad so far, and I don't think that Purdy just forces him the ball when he knows he can trust Jennings. They've practiced together all offseason. So I trust the chemistry here. San Francisco's also pissed. They lost 2 in a row, and they will easily hang 30 plus against a terrible team, the Patriots. So Jennings is a must start. I do not care about this matchup at all. And until Debo and Kittle come back, he is never coming out of your lineup. Purdy loves him. Number 14, though, I have Tyreek Hill versus Tennessee, and this ranking scares me, honestly. I really don't want to trust Tim Boyle. Maybe Thompson will be healthy enough to play, but they just have no offense if they have to rely on the third-string quarterback. So the Titans are a legit secondary that I do give as a downgrade as well. So drawing L'Jarius Sneed doesn't help him here. But at some point, I can't disrespect the name value. The speed is just too high to ignore. And Tyreek Hill is still the cheetah after all. So he's still in your lineup, I think, but you're not considering him top 10 anymore until Tua returns. That is just not the case. And I kind of don't want to see Tua come back for the sake of his health. So this is not good for Tyreek's fantasy value unless they trade for like Russell Wilson or, some backup. What are you really getting from Tyreek? So the lowest I can go here is 14, but I kind of want to drop him outside the top 20. He feels really risky in this spot. But number 15, I have Garrett Wilson versus Denver. And I know number 15 probably looks and sounds too low, but he's just one spot behind Tyreek Hill. It's still a pretty good ranking, one that you're still starting most of the time. There are some excellent matchups for other players, and Denver's not a great one to get stuck with. Surtain has not played well this year, according to PFF, but at some point, I do trust him to play well. I'm not too worried about the targets for Garrett Wilson. He's averaging just under 9 targets per game with Rodgers, but his yards have gone down every week, and that's not a good sign. Without a touchdown to bail you out last week, he would not have even cracked 6 points in half PPR. So the risk is there. Just like Tyreek Hill, I don't feel like super comfortable with this player, but I don't think Wilson is a player you're benching. He's just too talented, and eventually the connection with Rodgers will click. Let's hope it happens this week, but against the Broncos, not convinced it's the most likely situation to happen. Thankfully, he has not been as disappointing as Brandon Aiyuk, who I have at number 16 here versus the Patriots. There's no other way to put it. He has been bad. I've endorsed him all year long, so I have to own up to the miss on this through 3 weeks. He has not lived up to my expectation. He had 10 targets last week without Debo, but he also failed to go over 50 yards in every game this season. And what made it worse is just how elite Juaun Jennings was playing. So he completely stole the show. Aiyuk does not look ready compared to him, but eventually I think he will, and that's why I'm not benching him. I still rank him top 20 because of the situation he is in, especially while Debo and Kittle are injured. He'll probably see another 10 targets this week. So maybe he shows the Patriots why he didn't want to play for them and finally breaks out. It will happen eventually. Number 17, though, I have Diontae Johnson versus Cincinnati, and this feels destined to disappoint, but he did get 14 targets from Dalton in week 3, and we consider the Raiders to have a decent secondary, although some players did get lazy. I would not be endorsing Diontae this high if Thielen did not get hurt, but Thielen has a hamstring injury. He's been placed on IR, and Diontae is clearly the guy for the next month. So I have no real issues here. I think what we saw with Dalton is maybe not legit. They're not going to hang 30 plus every week, but I do think with competent quarterback play, we are going to get the role we saw last year from Adam Thielen in this offense. It can support a top 20 wide receiver on a weekly basis. So it's all about volume. There is nothing to fear from Leggett or Mingo at the moment. And I was worried about Thielen, but now he's irrelevant. So Diontae looks like a lock in your lineup. I feel so shocked to say it. This is really a weird call I did not expect to be making, but he looks fantastic, and 14 targets is too big to ignore. So you got to start him. You have to start Diontae Johnson. Let's hope it continues. Dalton gets a revenge game against the Bengals. Number 18, though, I have Zay Flowers versus Buffalo, and he only had 4 targets in week 3, but Dallas could not stop the run. And they were up 28-6 entering the fourth quarter, so there was really no point in forcing him the ball. I still think when they do need to throw, he is clearly their number 1 target. Game script, I think, shifts back in his favor. I'm not jumping ship on Flowers after just one bad game. The volume in the first 2 weeks is what I am reading into. It was too high to dismiss. So I'm still ranking him top 20. I think he's still a must start. I am factoring him a lack of floor, though, but this week I don't think that happens. I'm still trusting Zay Flowers. Number 19, I got Davante Adams versus Cleveland, and I do not think the Browns will be stupid enough to not have Denzel Ward shadow Adams like they didn't last week against Malik Nabers. So I don't think he gets that lucky, and it is a downgrade of a matchup. So I think you still have to start him based on who he is. This is what I was expecting coming into the year. I ranked him very close to wide receiver 20, not number 10, and I think it's going to be a little bit boom bust some weeks. He will disappear on occasion, and then he'll be fantastic the following game. So I do still trust him. I think you have to start him, but I'm not like super encouraged that he's the player we once remembered a few years ago. Number 20, I have Stefon Diggs versus Jacksonville. I mentioned last week that if Dell did not step up, I would be ranking Diggs higher, and here he is. He is not back-to-back with Dell. I don't think you're super excited about the depth of target for Diggs. He's only averaging 8.2 yards per catch this season, but he's also caught 20 of 24 targets, and 12 of them came last week. He scored 2 touchdowns as well in week 1. He's averaging 13 points per game this season. And if you have Dell, you would much rather swap stat lines with Diggs. So I think you have to start him. I think he's definitely proven you can trust him. And while he's not as good as Nico Collins, he's still a very safe play. He's the clear number 2 option for CJ Stroud, and that is valuable. Number 21, I have Chris Olave at the Falcons, and Olave found the end zone for the first time in a top 5 matchup last week, but he didn't capitalize in the way I was hoping. He still only had 6 targets combined, and I would have liked to see more, but he did catch all 6 of them for 86 yards and a score, so we at least know he's capable of having a great game here or there. It's just a matter of whether or not the play calling dictates he sees more volume, because once he gets it, the ceiling is top 10. We're just waiting for it to happen. I'm not convinced it happens here, though, because in 4 career games versus the Falcons, Olave is only averaging 10.1 points per game. His average stat line is 4 catches for 66 yards and only 1 touchdown in 4 games. So I'm worried about the touchdown upside here, and the volume is just not like as big as I was expecting. He is not like automatically top 20 every week. But here at 21, I still think he's a very legit high-end flex play, if not a low-end wide receiver 2. I want to play the matchups a bit more with him when it comes to his high-end rankings. So you're probably starting him. I don't think you're panicking, but the volume is a little less than what we thought. Number 22, though, I have Drake London versus New Orleans in the very same game. And in this matchup, in 4 career games versus New Orleans, London is only averaging 8.4 points per game against Marshawn Lattimore. So I'm not that encouraged. He has not scored a touchdown at all in those 4 games, and I'm worried it does not happen once again. Maybe Cousins helps him turn it around. He's thrown him 16 targets the last 2 weeks, and he has 6 catches and a touchdown in each of those 2 games as well. So the chemistry for London is starting to develop between him and Cousins. I think he's earned high-end flex consideration. Number 22, I think, is most of the time still a player you're starting. Number 23, I have Amari Cooper at the Raiders, and he's questionable right now. He suffered an undisclosed injury late in the 4th quarter, so monitor his health status. He may not play in week 4, but if he does, I think you have to start him, because despite 2 bad games to start the year, he still has 29 targets on the season, and if you're getting close to 10, that player is usually guaranteed a spot in your lineup. Last week, the volume turned into points with 7 catches for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was fantastic. So he is kind of in the same conversation as Diontae Johnson, and that does represent the ceiling this week because he's also playing the Raiders, the team that Diontae just went off on last week. Even Thielen scored a touchdown on Las Vegas before getting hurt. So I think Cooper is a very good play. It's just a question of will he stay healthy, and will Deshaun Watson play well, I do worry about that. Let's be honest. That's not a given, a guarantee to happen. So that is the risk. He could burn you, but if he's healthy, I think he's a top 25 player this week. Number 24, I have Mike Evans versus Philly. And when he scored 2 touchdowns in week 1, you thought he would be the same player as always. But he's been a liability since then. Only 3 targets in week 3 and a maximum of 6 in any game this year. So with only 59 total yards on 5 catches the last 2 games, he has no floor at all. You're not even getting like 5 points guaranteed. So you desperately need a touchdown with Evans for him to pay off right now. And it looks like so far the roles have completely reversed between him and Godwin from last year. Godwin has scored in every game. That's what Evans was doing last season. Meanwhile, Godwin only scored 2 touchdowns last year, and Evans has not scored since week 1. So I am worried. I do worry about Baker getting multiple players involved every week. And if it's not a good matchup, I would definitely be fading Mike Evans. But here at number 24, I am starting him because it's against the Eagles, and it has been a top 4 matchup. So far this season, they've allowed 5 wide receiver touchdowns, and that's what you're looking for. So I do think Evans will bounce back. I do think he'll probably finish the year with 1,000+ yards. That's what he does every single season, but I don't think he's the better option anymore. I think you definitely prefer Chris Godwin of the 2. Number 25, I have Rome Odunze versus the Rams, and the light turned on for the Bears passing game last week. If they are going to live up to expectation, then the 9th overall pick needs to be established. And if week 3 was an indication, that's what we're going to get moving forward. He was comped in the same vein as Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison, and if that's going to play out, he needs to get going very soon. So I think he will live up to the hype inevitably, and I do think he has massive upside in this matchup. The Rams have a leaky secondary. They've allowed 36 points per game to wide receivers in fantasy this year, 6 touchdowns and 189 yards per game to the position. So love Odunze's upside this week. I was very encouraged with week 3, and I do think Caleb will start to lock on to Odunze as the season goes on. He could turn into their number 1 option over DJ Moore. So especially while Keenan Allen is out, I think you have to capitalize on the value here. I do think Rome is a legit flex play this week. I'd be trying to start him if I can because the matchup is fantastic. Number 26, though, I got Khalil Shakir at Baltimore, and he has gotten the most targets of all Bills wide receivers this year. In no games has he seen more than 6, but he's also caught every single one of his 14 targets this season. He has a 100% catch percentage, and if that continues, then Allen is going to trust him every single week. This offense is elite, and it has led to Shakir scoring 2 touchdowns so far. So he is definitely the guy you want to target of the 3. And until we see someone else established, I think you're trusting him as a legit flex play every single week. The Ravens defense sounds difficult, but this year it's actually been a top 5 matchup. In this game, it could be a shootout, and I do see some touchdown upside for Khalil. Number 27, though, I got George Pickens at the Colts, and the Colts just gave up 212 yards to the Bears wide receivers and 4 touchdowns so far to the position in 3 games. Pickens hasn't been lighting it up yet, but he's showed some promise and definitely is the main target for Justin Fields. He feels due for a touchdown, and I like this matchup for him as Fields is beginning to earn more trust in the passing game. I do think Pickens starts to emerge as a trustworthy start in good matchups. I ranked him as wide receiver 24 entering the season, and I think his explosiveness is the reason why. I believe it will show itself soon enough, and this is a good spot to bet on. I think Pickens is a high-end flex play this week. Number 28, I have JSN Jaxon Smith-Njigba at Detroit. I'm a little bit worried about his game log. It's been weird so far. He had 2 targets in week 1, he had 16 in week 2, and then he fell back down to 3 last week. So I am worried about Lockett's role. It doesn't make JSN a clear number 2 option, but I do think there is a trend here happening. And if the yo-yo pattern repeats, then I do think we're in line for a boom game in week 4. If the targets come back, then JSN will feast on this matchup. Detroit is currently top 3 against wide receivers in fantasy, allowing 35.9 points per game, almost number 2. And that's on 18 catches per game for 203 yards per game, along with 3 touchdowns. They are a great matchup for receivers. It's definitely an upgrade for JSN this week. I think he could return that week 2 upside in week 4. Number 29, I have Brian Thomas at Houston, and Christian Kirk finally arrived to the party last week. So it makes it more crowded for Thomas in terms of target competition, but he's really looked good ever since week 1. I do not think Evan Ingram being hurt, though, helps him because it draws in more defensive attention, but this team is getting desperate, and Thomas looks like their best athlete. So similar to Pickens, I think the explosiveness is going to win out eventually, and he's earned weekly lineup consideration. Brian Thomas is the Jags receiver to start, in my opinion. Number 30, I got Jameson Williams versus Seattle. And week 3 was terrible, but he is still an established piece of this offense. Goff was not looking great this season, and I still don't think the offense has clicked yet. But Laporta is not fully healthy, so even as the team focuses more on the run, he's still got the boom appeal to want to start him. And I do worry about the Seahawks defense. Last year, Detroit had their worst game of the year against the Mike McDonald defense of Baltimore, and Seattle could show up in the same fashion. So they also beat them last year. I think this game will be kind of ugly, and there might be a lot of stalled drives like we've seen with the Lions the first 3 weeks. They have yet to score more than 20 points in regulation, and if JMO disappears, he will burn you for the second week in a row. So a little less risky. He is not the player we thought he was coming out of week 2. Number 31, I have Terry McLaurin at Arizona, and during the first 2 weeks, Terry was not safe at all. So I don't want to overreact to a big game in prime time. He did score a touchdown, which you like to see, but without that 50-yard catch, his stat line would not have been as impressive. So 6 targets is not the most encouraging number. He caught 4 of them for 100 yards and a touchdown. So you're encouraged, but it's not that trustworthy. So I want to see it happen one more time. This is the matchup, though, where it could happen. The Cardinals secondary doesn't really scare you. So he is looking better. I do think you're very excited if you drafted him, but you were definitely panicking the first 2 weeks, and that's why I can't fully endorse him top 30 just yet. I want to see it one more time. Number 32, I got Jayden Reed versus the Vikings, and his work in the run game gives me the confidence to still rank him top 35, but it boosts his floor by about 2 to 3 points any week, and if one breaks for a touchdown, you won't be surprised at all. So he's their number 1 receiver, and even Malik Willis can get him involved. This is going to be a dogfight against the Vikings, but if I'm betting on any Packers touchdown to hit, it would most likely be going to Jayden Reed. So obviously, he becomes a must start if Jordan Love plays. I'd probably rank him top 15 in that scenario, but with Malik Willis, he only comes in at number 32. Number 33, I have Jalen Nailor at Green Bay, and for the moment, we don't know if Addison will play. If he doesn't, I will hold on this rank, but monitor Addison's status. He looks questionable. He might start practicing. In this same game, though, as Jayden Reed, I think Jalen Nailor has some legit upside. We know the Packers are going to be focusing a lot on Jefferson, and Nailor has scored 3 touchdowns in 3 games. Sam Darnold appears to trust him, and Darnold has been on fire. So I honestly think I might be too low on Nailor. The upside is legit, and he might be the number 1 target in this matchup if Jair truly locks up Jefferson. So I think he's a legit pickup. Obviously, if Addison is healthy, then ignore that. But for the moment, I think you want to be starting the Vikings number 2 receiver, and this week it might be Nailor once again. Number 34, I have Darnell Mooney versus New Orleans, and he's caught all 8 of his targets in week 3 for 66 yards. It's the second game in a row with at least 7 targets, and London has never scored a touchdown against the Saints. So he might get an extra red zone look in this matchup. We're mostly looking at wide receiver 2s with upside moving forward in the rankings, and historically it's not unwise to bet on the number 2 guy who plays with Kirk Cousins. Number 35, though, is where I have Tank Dell versus Jacksonville, who is questionable with a rib and a hand injury. I still believe in him long-term. I'm sure they want to get him more involved. Through the first 3 weeks, though, he is definitely behind Diggs in the target share. Although Diggs is mostly checkdowns, you would gladly swap Tank's stat line for Diggs, and it feels inevitable that it will work itself out for Tank. He has a very good connection with Stroud, at least he did last year, and I'm sure when he does blow up, it's going to be for over 20 points. But he's just not a safe play right now. It's not a guarantee for it to happen, and the fact that he's injured is definitely a downgrade as well. I would probably wait and see on Tank. Maybe consider shopping him. You might still get some high-end name value, but Probably not if they look at the numbers. So I probably just going to hold strong, but trying to bench him this week, it's not the safest play, but it could turn into 20 plus. At number 36, I have T. Higgins at Carolina, and he had a cushy matchup versus Washington in his debut last week, but he was less involved than Iosivas. He had 6 targets, Yoshi had 7, and I don't know if the hamstring is still bothering him, but I was pretty disappointed with only 3 catches for 39 yards and no touchdowns. So T. Higgins does not look very safe. The Panthers have allowed 5 touchdowns, though, to the position this year, and if he does not capitalize, if we see the touchdown go to Yoshi once again, I would be very worried. This is kind of a make or break spot for trusting T. Higgins. He might be just as bad as last year. Number 37, I got Tyler Lockett at Detroit, and he never gets 10 plus targets in any game, but in 2 out of the 3 games this year, he has seen the most targets of all 3 Seahawks receivers, and he's still very much involved in this offense. And while Metcalf is clearly the best option, I think he offers at worst the same floor of JSN. You don't know who will be the number 2 guy. I do think JSN has the higher ceiling, but any given week, it could be one or the other. And I do like the matchup for JSN, which means I also need to upgrade Lockett as well. He does have some spicy upside. Number 38, I have Rashid Shaheed at Atlanta. Just when you think you can trust him, he puts up a bagel. He is officially the new Gabe Davis this year, even 5 targets in a plus matchup versus the Eagles could not stop the bagel. So the upside, yes, is still 20 points any week, but now there is no floor to trust, and you are either a believer in him or you're not. It's kind of the same situation that we've seen with Gabe Davis and Mike Williams in the past. You've either been burned too often to ever put him in your lineup, or you believe that the upside will hit this week and you just feel lucky enough to make that gamble. It's not the worst gamble, especially against the Falcons. In his career 3 games, he does have 2 touchdowns against them, and you never know, maybe one of those deep passes does hit, but he is just not a guaranteed player to go off. When he doesn't, it will burn you. So buyer beware, you are playing with fire with Shaheed. Number 39 and 40, I have Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins back-to-back on the road at Miami. And it looks like the upside in this offense is going to be there for one Titans receiver every week. The problem is picking the right one, because whoever is the second guy has no floor at all. Maybe it was just Hopkins' injury, but he had 1 catch in each of the first 2 games. Ridley went off in week 2 with 2 touchdowns, but then in week 3, it shifted in favor of Hopkins, who had 6 for 73 and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Ridley only had 1 catch. So if you're getting a touchdown from one and only 1 catch from the other, and it's not guaranteed who it will go to, this is a very risky situation, and I don't feel confident that Will Levis can make both players viable. So I am trying to pass on this situation. I want a bit more clarity before I trust it. Basically, the 2 of them are the Rashid Shaheed gamble, just embodied and split between 2 players. A boom with one or an absolute bust with the other, nothing in between, and that is really not that exciting. But here at this point in the rankings, this tier is all about boom bust appeal, and you are chasing touchdowns. Xavier Worthy at number 41 is the perfect example. I would love to see him get consistent volume, but clearly he just hasn't earned the trust yet. Once he gets over 6 targets in consecutive games, I think he'll probably be a lot safer, but he's been held to just 4 over the last 2 weeks, and I'm not convinced they forced the issue against a divisional rival if it's just not working. So he can obviously pop off, but historically this is where Kelsey has the hero game for the Chiefs, and I'll just pass on Worthy this week. I want to see it a bit more often before I trust him. But the ceiling is definitely higher. The floor is not there. Number 42, I have Andrei Iosivas at Carolina, and I am legitimately worried about T. Higgins' role in the offense, but it's not like the value just disappears. It moves elsewhere, and that is clearly going to Iosivas. He has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. He's also got 7 targets in week 3. Higgins had 6, and maybe Higgins' hamstring is the only reason, but we know next year Higgins is probably not on the team, and Iosivas will be the number 2. So it's a possibility that the baton does get passed while Higgins is still on the roster. It may have already happened if last week was legit. So I would at least pick him up. I think he's very interesting, and if you believed in T. Higgins, you have to be a bit worried about Yoshi, who might have the same role. Number 43 is Christian Kirk at Houston, and Kirk is kind of on the same realm as Hopkins, where he had terrible games in the first 2 weeks, but then showed up in week 3. He did not score a touchdown, but he did catch 8 of 10 targets for 79 yards. I definitely prefer Brian Thomas, but it is good to see Kirk not look washed. He's a legit flyer this week as he claws back up the rankings. I'm not convinced I trust him yet, but he might be back to the 11 point per game player he was the previous 2 years. He has a 50-50 track record versus the Texans, though, as a Jaguar. 2 good games, 2 bad games. I'll likely pass this week, but he's not a guy I'm dropping just yet. Number 44, I got Michael Pittman versus Pittsburgh, and maybe the Pittman against Pitt does play well, but I'm honestly pretty worried about him this week. Richardson cannot hit the checkdowns at all, and that's the role Pittman is occupying in this offense. So his targets don't mean very much if they don't start to develop down the field, and it kind of feels like the only way Richardson is going to throw a touchdown is if it's at least from 20 yards out. So his week 3 performance of 4 catches for 36 yards really scares me. It's been his best on the season, and I do not feel safe trusting him against the Steelers. Number 45, I have Michael Wilson versus Washington. And if you told me that Trey McBride is out with a concussion, I'd probably bump him up another 10 spots against the Commanders. It's a truly superb matchup here, and I've rambled enough about how it's the number 1 spot to be in, but last week you were very encouraged. Wilson had 9 targets, and Greg Dortch is not 100% healthy. So I do think that can repeat for Michael Wilson. Kyler needs another weapon, and there is some elite upside anytime you face off against Washington. So I love Michael Wilson this week. I would want to pick him up off the wire, but if McBride does play, this is where I'll stay. It is a bit risky in that situation. Number 46, I have Jalen Waddle versus Tennessee, and I just have no confidence with Tim Boyle as the quarterback. Maybe Tyreek Hill gets shut down and Waddle is the guy, but the odds that turns into anything of value without a touchdown is very low, and we've reached the touchdown-dependent zone of the rankings. Jerry Jeudy comes in at 47 at Las Vegas, and Cooper did take over in week 3, but he's also questionable at the moment. So Jeudy might become the number 1 option in week 4, especially if Njoku remains sidelined. He could move up the rankings just like Michael Wilson. Number 48, I have Cortland Sutton at the Jets, and he's back to the number 1 target in Denver. He has 2 games with 11 plus targets, but only averaging 6.4 fantasy points per game. No way am I starting him against the Jets, but he does still have value. I'm not dropping him at this point. Number 49 and 50, I have the 2 Chargers receivers, Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey versus the Chiefs, and I'm really not sure who their number 1 guy actually is. If Herbert was healthy, we would probably know more if he finished last week's game, but one of those players has the chance to hit any given week, but predicting which one is the hard part. And it looks like QJ has more upside, but Ladd is getting more targets and has the higher floor. I'll be adjusting this ranking once I know for sure if Herbert plays, but I don't think you can really start them the next 2 weeks. They're against the Chiefs, then on bye, and we probably won't get much clarity, especially if Heineke plays, you can't start them at all. So probably just going to pass here. Feels too risky. But at number 51, I am intrigued with Jacoby Myers versus Cleveland. All 3 Vegas receivers had 9 targets last week, and I'm not sure who the quarterback is, and I still think he is behind Bowers, but he does have some sneaky upside. I wouldn't be shocked if he had a big role randomly week to week. So it's easy to forget about him, though, and I almost forgot to rank him, honestly, but at 51, you could do worse. He is an interesting dart throw this week. Number 52, though, I have Wanda Robinson versus Dallas, and the Giants might get blown out and do nothing on offense here, but if they do compete, then Wandale is a legit part of the offense. He's averaging 8 targets per game and caught 7 for 61 last week. He's not going to give you a bagel, but the ceiling isn't that high. Number 53, I have Keon Coleman at Baltimore, and Coleman is kind of on equal footing with Curtis Samuel in some ways, but you know his role will only grow as the rookie year progresses. Betting on the Bills isn't a bad idea, but he clearly needs a touchdown in order to work out. It is a bit desperate to start Keon in week 4. Number 54, though, I have Jalen Tolbert at the Giants, and I think he's more valuable than Cooks right now, but I'm not convinced it's by much. He has been the more valuable of the 2 for the last 2 games now, but that could change at any time. Give me one more game before I start trusting a second Cowboys receiver. Number 55, I have Allen Lazard versus Denver, and Mike Williams is starting to get going, but Lazard has the longer relationship with Rodgers, so the better chemistry. I still prefer him over Mike Williams, but obviously he's behind Garrett Wilson. He's not that safe at the end of the day. Number 56 and 57, I have Tutu Atwell and Demarcus Robinson of the Rams at Chicago, and one of the Rams receivers might play well, but I genuinely hate the matchup versus the Bears secondary. I cannot tell you which one will go off, so I'm just benching both. I'd rather just avoid any receiver. Only Kyren Williams is safe for the Rams. Number 58, I have Christian Watson followed by Romeo Doubs at 59 versus the Vikings, and they just lose all their upside with Malik Willis at quarterback. They need Love to come back for you to feel any level of confidence. A touchdown could pop up randomly here, though. I just don't feel safe to bet on it. You could do worse, but I will pass. And lastly, the last player in these rankings is Demario Douglas at San Francisco, and so far he's the only Pats receiver to catch more than 30 yards in a game. He had 9 targets last week, 7 catches, and 78 total yards, but it wouldn't shock me if he puts up a bagel in week 4. And at the moment, I don't think you can trust a single Patriots receiver. Maybe he emerges, but I wouldn't be shocked either if he plays the entire year without a touchdown, just like last season. So keep an eye on him, but I'm not going to pick him up or start him. So these are my top 40 wide receiver rankings. I feel excellent about the top 13. I think you're getting 20 plus points from the top 4. Everyone through Marvin Harrison should go off and be ballistic. But I think all the way through Juaun Jennings, you're getting excellent players, probably like 16 plus points as well. And I do think wide receivers a lot deeper this week than the running back position. Running back falls off a cliff once you get to like RB 25. But I think once you hit wide receiver 36, even 38 with Rashid Shaheed, you're still like kind of enticed, and I do think this is the way to go at flex this week. I feel a lot more confident with these players. I think all the way through Khalil Shakir at number 26, you have very good options, very legit wide receiver 2s in your lineup, and if they're your flex, you're very, very excited about your winning potential this week. So good luck. I think George Pickens through Tank Dell are very legit flex plays, and don't be surprised if Michael Wilson or Jerry Jeudy vault up the rankings if there are some players on the injury report on their teams. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. Let me know in the comment section down below if you have any start-sit decisions, and I'll be happy to answer them. But I'll see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.